Welcome to the Executive Alliance podcast. I'm Rebecca Snyder, Executive Director of Executive Alliance. In each episode, alternating hosts Christine Walsh and myself will sit down with accomplished women leaders in Maryland to explore the journeys that shaped them, the challenges they overcame, and the insights they've gained along the way. We'll also tackle the issues that influence women's leadership today, from opportunities for growth and advancement to the systems and barriers that can stand in our way. Through authentic conversations and shared experiences, we're building a community where women learn from one another, support one another, and move forward together. We're glad you're here. Hi, everyone. I am delighted to have Diana Emerson in the studio today. Diana's the executive director of Emerge Maryland, which, if you don't know, is Maryland's candidate training organization for Democratic women who are interested in pursuing elected and appointed office. So Diana's come to this after a long time career in the nonprofit and civic space, where she spent over 25 years advocating for communities, advancing smart economic development, supporting education and equity, and helping women and minority-owned businesses to grow. So much we can talk about, Diana. I'm really glad to have you.
Thanks for having me.
And of course, I would be remiss in saying, in noting that you're also a member of Executive Alliance, which is how we know each other, and serve on the advocacy committee. And I wanted to start there because we've just come off of a primary, the primary in Maryland. There's been some real shifts and changes for women in that primary. So catch us up if people have been disassociating from the political world. Tell us what's going on.
Yeah, I'm first super excited that the primary is over and that
I
we are
bet.
headed into the general election. But for us, at least on the Emerge side, we had a little over, and I had to keep kind of checking our numbers, but we had a little over 93 women on the ballot, and that was
That's
across the
huge.
state. Yeah, it was huge, and it was a first for Emerge. We have a little over 250 alums now. But to have that many women who stepped up, who raised their hand, who said, I can do this better. And not only can I do this better, I see room for improvement in our communities, our schools, the list goes on. And from that, from the primary election, we picked up about 74 wins from the primary election. So
Okay, that seems
these,
like an amazing take-up rate. I mean, 73 out of 98, that is huge. Did you expect to have such a groundswell?
I was hoping for it. So I know I'm probably a little bit biased because I wanted, all 90 plus women to win their races, but they had tough races. And I think we saw that across the state that the Maryland State Party focused on contest every seat. So there
Mhm.
was a Democrat this year in every seat across the state, which we have not seen. So that just right there is monumental that we had no uncontested Democratic, not just Democratic, uncontested seats
Mhm.
across the state. So we have more of a contested election, which in my opinion, I think that's how it should be. We should have a little bit of a challenge. We should have a little bit of a competition. Now, we did have just some sad losses,
Mm.
which also will affect our numbers in terms of how many women you see now in some of these seats. Collectively out of 47 senators, we have we had 13 women senators. We lost about 4 of those seats, so now we're in single digits. We'll probably gain 1 more seat, I think.
Mhm.
Um, but then, we lost Delegate Stephanie Smith,
Right. Huge
which is
blow.
a huge, huge loss, a sad loss. She had been in office since, I believe, 2018.
Well, and she
So
was gonna be the president of the Women's Legislators
yeah,
Caucus,
yeah,
so I
yeah.
mean, totally unexpected to see her go.
Absolutely. So, just seeing some of these losses was definitely sad to see, but we picked up some amazing folks. I mean, I'm excited for Adrienne Mathis in St. Mary's County, which is a space that we typically have not had women in St. Mary's County run for some of
Hmm.
these seats. Um, we picked up Ilaria Stanley in Frederick for a delegate seat, which could potentially, if she gets through the general, would be the first trans woman in the House of Delegates for the
Oh,
state,
that's
which is
huge.
huge, like just groundbreaking. So that's very, very exciting. We have Basant Khandri, who is a newcomer, ran for Central Committee, but would also be some of the few women, hijab wearing women in the party, which is exciting to see a variety in such a diverse population. So, this election was really, really important to make sure that we balance the state, but really just getting more women in place.
Well, and I want to talk about that because the diversity of women that are there, I think is finally we're getting some reflection of Maryland's a wildly diverse state when you think about it,
Right.
by all objective measures. But the legislature really doesn't. The House is a lot stronger in this, but the Senate, my goodness, and I just want to go back and loop in to really do some math here. If we're in single digits, um, if there's 9 women out of 47 seats, that is 19% women.
Right.
And when we look at those women, they are the majority white women. So the diversity of Maryland is not at all reflected in the Senate. And
Correct.
so I want to talk a little bit about why it's so important to you to have that reflection in a political space, and how you get women to raise their hands for and be considered for those races when you're trying to contest every race. You have some people going out in really Republican districts who know they're going to lose, kind of thing, but still do it anyway. So tell me a little bit about why it's important and how you convince women to kind of put themselves out there in an unforgiving space, even when they
Yeah.
think you lose.
Yeah, I mean, so one, it's understanding the stats of women in office. Women in office pass more legislation. It's been historically proven that women pass more legislation. Not only do women pass more legislation, they're more willing to work across party aisles to
Mm,
get the job done. And kind of that next piece behind that, they're also passing impactful legislation that doesn't just benefit them. They're passing legislation that benefits the entire family dynamic. So they're
mhm,
really thinking big picture, and we don't necessarily see that from men elected officials. They kind of think a little bit more singular, not knocking any of our male men officials, because quite a few of them do an amazing job. But women look at things, I think, very, very different. We look at things very holistic.
it kind of
And
looking at that systems thinking about, okay, well, and how do we center, and not just like how do we only look at families or women's issues, but I feel like in the legislation that I've seen come through, they notice the interconnectedness of
right,
those issues, and there's always a bottleneck in the Senate. The Senate can only senators are limited to, I think, 20 bills each session, and so but you need to have cross files, bills in both House and Senates, to
right.
pass legislation. And so just from a pipeline perspective, Maryland's missing out on a lot of different types of legislation simply because of the structure. Am I getting that right?
Ab- yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why it's so important to have more women in the Senate. I mean, you just ran the math. That's 19% representation. That is nothing when you compare that to the full makeup of the state. Now, when it comes to getting women to raise their hand, it's definitely tricky. It's not easy. It takes women to be asked 7 times before they go, okay, I think I can do this. Let me raise my hand. Let me write my name on the dotted line. 7 times. So within those 7 times that they're asked, they're thinking about, well, I'm the mom. Will I have time? I'm the caregiver. Will I have time? Who's going to take care of all the things that happen in kind of the traditional wife role or woman role in your family, wherever you may lay? And that's kind of part of the Emerge training. We tell women to have that conversation with your family first, but
Mhm.
also understanding that your family is the same one who may not be supportive of that decision, and you have to be okay with that. You have to have a follow-up conversation with your employer.
Mhm.
You may work in a space where, running for office is a conflict of interest. I knew years ago when I ran for Central Committee and I had my conversation with my then employer, I had already made the decision. If they say no, this is what I want to do and I'm out the door. So
Mhm.
I had already had that conversation with my family, like, is this okay financially? Because that's the other component that you have to think about. And there's a huge fear factor. Men raise way more money in elections than women do,
Mhm.
way more money. Elections are not cheap. And I think over the last probably 6 or 7 election cycles, we have seen races increase on such a kind of ridiculous level if you think about it. Some races, it makes sense that they need to raise XYZ amount of dollars. If you look at um, Governor Moore, he has to get across the state. He has to
Right.
spend time in very rural areas. He has to spend time in Western Maryland. That makes sense to raise that level of money. Does it make sense for school board?
Maybe not. Maybe
Maybe
not.
not, right?
Well, but the thing that blows my mind with, like, the primary, I think the turnout was, like, maybe 27%. It was
Ugh,
something really
turnout was so
so
horrible.
sad.
Yeah.
And when you're looking at some of the dollars that get spent in campaigns, I think some of it is just, like, breaking through people's disassociation or ignorance to even let them know there's an election going on and they should care. I mean, I live in District 41, and there were a lot of spicy
Mm.
things going on in that district. I mean, welcome to Baltimore City. But still, like, the turnout is so low. It's almost like you're begging people to come out. So it's not just like, I have to convince you of my platform. I have to also convince you that you need to vote straight out. Are you
Yeah.
seeing that?
Oh, absolutely. One, that is really kind of not the sole responsibility of central committees, but our central committees should really be focused on how do we get people not just registered to vote, but then to turn around and show up to actually vote. So, that's a two-prong piece. And I think that's an approach that central committees have to really knuckle down all across the state because voter turnout this year was just abysmal. However, I did notice something. So, I did some door knocking actually in your district, in District 41. And it was so interesting when I would speak to people who said, well, I'm not voting. And of course, like I feel like every time someone tells me they're not going to vote, my little heart just
Oh, I know. I
stops.
was like, "Oh my god."
I'm like, okay, I have to, and then it becomes like my focus in convincing you to vote. But it was so interesting to have that conversation with people where they said, well, what's it matter? And I was like,
Mm,
okay, well, let's talk about that. Do you feel that the current electeds are not passing quality of life legislation that's making an impact on you today? And most of them couldn't tell you any legislation that has impacted them today. They said
mm,
my taxes are still the same, I'm still unemployed, or my groceries have doubled. I mean, you could see the the struggle that individuals or families were having where they said, what's it matter?
mm,
They said the next person coming in isn't really going to improve my current day-to-day life. And that
So
really
what do
stuck with me. And I had
you
a conversation with this one gentleman, and he said, well, he said, I'm a Democrat. And he said, um, there's only two Democrats running for the seat, right? I said, yeah. And he said, so either way we win, right? And I said, that's an interesting way of looking at it because I hadn't thought about it. So he said, so what does it matter? We have
mm.
two people from the same party running. They're not up against a Republican or an independent for the general. So what's it matter? Why should I go out of my way when we win anyway? And I said, huh. And I really didn't have a response
Well,
for
but what
that.
do you say to people? Because honestly, there's outside of Maryland's so heavily Democratic, at least in
Right.
in most areas, that the primary guides the general for the most part. Like if you want any choices, it's the primary
Right.
for the most part. But what did you tell people as you were door knocking who feel like it's always going to be the same no matter who's filling those seats? Because I have a different perspective, but I come at it from a really different lens. What did you tell them?
Yeah. So I had to talk to him about, well, what are the things right now that make you angry? I was like, what is pissing you off right in this second? And he
Hmm.
said, well, my street's messy, or like the speed bumps. He said the other day, like I hit a speed bump so hard it like popped a hole in either his oil tank or something.
Well,
And I
some
said,
might say slow down, friend, but
that
whatever.
part,
That's me judging.
that part. And I said, oh, I said, these are things that you're angry about. You can do something about it. I said, this is how we hold our elected officials accountable. And when
Hmm.
they're not doing what we need them to do as their constituents, I said, then guess what? We don't have to vote them in again. You can
Right.
pick someone else and you can tell that other person, hey, this last elected, I complained 20 times about the potholes on my street and nothing got done. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah.
That's how we hold people accountable. And it's also, which I don't know if this is a Baltimore problem, and I've kind of coded it in my head as a Baltimore problem, that people also are not aware of what elected officials do what.
Yeah. I think that's a big part of it. For me, when the world seems like it's literally a dumpster fire, like my circle just contracts, contracts, contracts to something that I can control. So, like, I know I could keep my desk clean. I know, like my own house, it's my world and I have a lot of influence there. But my neighborhood, I can affect things there. My council district, like, I know, like, these are all people that I can call and talk to about, like, I don't like what you're doing here. Like, my state, I can have influence there because the numbers are not so big. Like, I know in my congressional district or in the federal, like, it's hard to really make a lot of change as one person the farther out you go out of your sphere. But the more local you are, the more influence you can have.
Right.
And the more those issues affect your day to day, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's a lot of legislation that goes through, you and I are both in Baltimore City, but the city council, they're the ones, they're controlling our property taxes. They're controlling, whether we can get a plastic bag from the store, like all these little issues out there, they control our roads and whatnot. That's all very local and people do have an effect there. But I also see the point where, like, you're looking on a ballot and you're voting you know, for 3 delegates and there's only 3 delegates on the ballot, and you think, "Well, how am I doing that?" So I kinda wanna get back to building the bench, which is what Emerge does, and
Mm-hmm.
before we get too deep, can you tell us just briefly what Emerge does, and then also some of the nonpartisan things that you do? And then I wanna
Sure.
talk about the bench.
Yeah. So Emerge Maryland is the signature training program for Democratic women here in the state. So we are a part of a national organization. So Emerge America does these trainings all across the country. We are the local affiliate here in the state. And we train women who want to not just run for office, but to be leaders in their local community.
Mhm.
So we do programs like the Taste of Emerge, which we actually have coming up this weekend, and then we'll do a couple more throughout the summer into the fall. But that's kind of a first taste, if you will, about what this could potentially look like if you're looking at running for office. It's also a nice way to say, ooh, that may be too much for me. What else can I do? And then that's when we start talking about boards and commissions and
Mhm.
executive level opportunities and being able to connect to like organizations like the Executive Alliance and other spaces so that women can get a well-rounded experience. And then for
Mhm.
those who say, yes, sign me up. I think I want to run for office. I'm not sure yet for what, but I'm there. Those women we will put through a 70-hour training program that'll usually start in January and they'll graduate in May. And they will have a series of top-notch trainers that are talking to them really about everything, about campaign financing, about fundraising, what your brand is, being able to break down your story and be able to own your story, which I think for women is a little bit of a fear,
Mm.
right? We think about what's in our closet, what have we done in the past, what we haven't done in the past, who's going to do digging and how we own our story and kind of control our narrative. Um, and then we really get into the nuts and bolts of building a campaign so that by
Mhm.
the time they graduate in mid-May, they are wheels turning, thinking about what is next for them and in that planning place. So it's a great program. It started in 2013. So my predecessor ran the organization for the last 13 years, and now we're going into year 15, which is really exciting with over 250 alums. And right now I'm recruiting
Wow,
for
huge.
our 2027 cohort, which is exciting.
That is. But then you also and I bring it up because Executive Alliance is a nonprofit and we're nonpartisan but our
Hmm.
goals really align in many respects because when you were talking about what you do in Emerge, sort of finding your voice, deciding how you want to present yourself to the world, we do that a lot in our mentoring program. We want women to succeed at the highest levels of leadership, so we're very interested in many of the issues that you work in. We just always make sure that there's a nonpartisan lens to it
Hmm.
because we want all women to succeed for sure.
Absolutely.
And so you're working in a subset, but you also have programs that are nonpartisan as
Yeah.
well.
So the Emerge America has a C4, which allows us to do kind of more nonpartisan work. So we have, um, I've had the opportunity over the last year and a half to present to D9 organizations, which are also nonpartisan,
Mhm.
presenting at the Congressional Black Caucus this past year, which was really exciting. I've been able to come into different spaces, different groups, different organizations to really just talk about running for office, period.
Right.
No D behind it, no R behind it, no I. Just this is what this looks like if you, as an individual, say, I want to run for office,
Mm.
period. So we've had opportunities to kind of talk about that. And I'll be doing another one later in August at University of Maryland to talk to some students about what that looks like, which is also exciting. Um, but on the nonpartisan side, being able to go to different organizations, being able to have that conversation about, yes, anybody can run, but if you feel like it's not for you, let's talk about how we get you into different leadership positions. Let's talk about where
Right.
else we can get you involved because change doesn't necessarily mean you need to be an elected official.
Yeah. Well, and so let's talk about the bench because I think
Yeah.
that's a big piece of it. And when you're looking out in the world, the candidate always seems to be like, oh, it's the candidate, but the candidate has a whole sort of infrastructure built in that I want to talk about and how everyone sort of has their spot and how you build that bench.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's figuring out what you are passionate about. For me, it's always been volunteerism.
Mhm.
I grew up in a family where my mom was a school teacher, my dad was military, so service was like literally drilled into me at like birth, where they were like, "This is what you do." We give back often, and figuring out how I could do that in a way that would build impact. So for me, that was joining the junior league. I
Mhm.
joined the Junior League of Baltimore 16, 17 years ago. Um, and I saw that there was an opportunity to build a bench, which was to
Mm.
bring a new chapter of the Junior League. So I founded the Prince George's County Junior League chapter, where I said, hey, there's service opportunities right in Prince George's. There's need right in Prince George's. They shouldn't have to want to be a junior league member and have to drive all the way to Baltimore to do
Right.
service. You're literally driving through service to get to another city or another town. You shouldn't have to drive to Annapolis when you're literally driving through service. So I worked with the national headquarters to bring a new chapter. It was funny timing because we wind up kicking off the new chapter right as the pandemic
Oh my
started.
gosh.
And I was like, "Ooh, I don't know if I'm built for for this," but we were able to start the chapter and get it up and running, and they just celebrated their 5-year, anniversary about a month ago, which was
Oh,
exciting.
congratulations.
Thank you. And I'm someone who likes to build and then step away,
Mhm.
because to me, that's how it's sustainable. You have given them the tools to succeed. You don't have to run it. I believe I'm here for a good time and not a long time,
Love that. Okay.
because I want the next person who is quicker, who has a bigger vision, to be able to step in right behind me.
Well, and I think that's part of building that bench,
Absolutely.
because it if it doesn't sustain, it's just a passion project. And there's a
Yeah,
lot of wonderful things that happen from passion projects, don't get me wrong. But if you're building that bench, and we talk about this because, our little side project, Executive Alliance, is working with other organizations to really help that pipeline of women into the Senate, and thinking through how we do that and emerge as a piece of that, as well as the Maryland Commission for Women, and Maryland
right,
legislative agenda for women. When we think about pipelining and the bench, that's not a next year thing. You have
right.
to think so far in advance. So, in a leadership perspective, like, how do you balance the excitement of right now with the hard work, sometimes a slog, of long term?
I think you have to always look at what's happening now and in the moment, but then what needs to happen 5 years from now. Where
Mhm.
do we also need to be 5 years from now? So if we're doing, I have my benchmarks where when I came into Emerge, I had already set goals for the year, but I said, "But in 5 years, this is where these numbers should be. This is, how many women we wanna see in the Senate. This is how many women we wanna see in council. This is, you know, we wanna see more women judges. We
Mhm.
wanna see
Oh,
more
absolutely.
women on the judicial side." So, I think it's important to think big picture, but then to also lift while you climb.
Mhm.
And I think as leaders, and I feel like a lot of times women are tasked with this more, that we are really constantly thinking about who is behind us and how to lift and how to open the door, when for men, the door is kinda already just open.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it's important for us, until we get to where we want to be, I think as a society, to be a good leader, you have to lift while you climb. You have to see that young person and say, okay, how can I mentor you? Executive Alliance is an amazing mentor program, where I've seen so many of those women who are on the mentee side really take that next leap into what is
Mhm.
next for them, and to think in a broader space. That's exactly how we lift while climbing.
Mm. I love that. And so, can you tell me about maybe an experience that you've had, either that you've been lifted while climbing? I mean, you've done so many things, you've been the leader of so many things, but, I feel like we're all on that progression. We all have something to learn and something to teach. So who's lifting you up? Who's mentoring you?
That's a really good question. And, funny you asked that. It's been in my brain for the last like couple of months where I was like, I don't know if I've ever had a mentor. I think
Mm,
I've looked at strong women and have said, "Oh my gosh, that's who I want to be. That's what I want
totally.
to do." Like, let me like Google, let me find like all the things that they have done, let me see how they have gotten from point A to point B. Um so I don't know if I've necessarily had a mentor. I have always looked, I think, to both of my parents. My dad
Mm,
was he knew everything and all the things about Baltimore, but also about the state. He was military, but he was former Baltimore City Police in the 60s. And he used to play this game with me where when we were here in the States, he'd go, "Okay, what neighborhood are you in? How do we get from this neighborhood to the other neighborhood? Okay, we're
mhm.
in that neighborhood. How do we get home?" And I'd be like, "Oh my gosh, Dad, I don't know." Like,
But
I
so
don't
useful.
know.
You need to know.
And it's funny because my husband will tell you I do that to him all the time now. And I'm like, "What neighborhood are we in? How do we
Mhm,
get to this neighborhood? How do we get home?" And he's like, "Why are you quizzing me?" Um, but I got to learn the city really well, and I got to learn the history of the city and the black butterfly, and, I learned so many things about the city that only I feel like he could have taught me. And
mhm.
I think that has built how I function in community spaces. I think that has built, in how I think when it comes to programming. And then my mom as a school teacher, I think that's the education piece. I was always wanting to learn everything that I could just get my hands on. If I don't know how to do it, someone teach me. I
Mhm.
will sit in any class, any training constantly because I love to learn. So I think between my mom and my dad, they both have, I think, given me the guidance that I needed to kind of figure out what was right in my career and where I wanted to go. And but the mentor piece I think is so important.
Well,
Um
and honestly, I'm thinking, and I think it's because you and I are of a similar age, and when we
mhm,
were coming up, mentoring wasn't such a thing. You did your work, you just did
right.
your work and a lot of it, and then figured that would be its own reward, and you'd figure out what you needed to know. And so I think of, the experience of seeing women out there and being like, "Oh, I wanna be like them." I think of that as like capsule mentoring, like you take different things from different people and kind of knit it together.
Mhm.
And I was thinking also a little bit, like the the things you try and heal about your younger self are kind of showing up in your life now. And I feel
Yes.
like you have such a commitment to mentoring and sort of knitting people together. And some of that is really around uh, the the community spaces that you were in, but I'm thinking maybe your emphasis on mentoring now is because you didn't see it when you were younger. Does that resonate at all?
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely. And I think as I have gotten older, and even when I was younger, in my mind, I was like, "Well, I'm too old to find a mentor." Because
Yeah, it always
I
feels that way.
right, it always feels that way. I mean, I remember being, early 30s, um, and being like, "Oh man, I've missed that boat to like find a mentor." And it's funny now, um, in my sorority, I know so many of the older women who were like, "Oh yeah, like that's my mentor. Like she started mentoring me 2 years ago or 3 years ago."
Mhm.
And I'm like, "Oh, I didn't think you could still get a mentor." It just was this mindset, but you're right. Like I think were taught you just do the work, you keep your head down, you'll be rewarded, and that's how you move through in life. You keep the same job 25 years, 30 years, and that's the success. And I think now in 2026, I think if women want a mentor, and you're 45, you're 50, you're 60, find one. And I
Mhm.
think it's that fear of, well, we've hit a certain age and we can't do that.
Mhm.
We
And I also
now
feel
can't do this.
it's just also, building relationships. Like, when
Right.
there's someone who's doing something that I wanna know more about, I'm not nervous anymore. I don't know if I was ever super nervous about it, but, like, I feel much more comfortable going up and being like, "Tell me how you've done this." Share your passion, and because you're really getting to know people, and I think, the value of relationships is, I think, just a lot stronger now than it maybe used to be. Um, so just thinking there. And so is there I wanted also to talk, you talked about your dad and how place-centered he was, and there are so many
Yeah.
amazing, uh, neighborhoods in Baltimore, and I used to run an estate sale company, so I feel like I
Oh,
know so many different
I
neighborhoods
love a
in
good
Baltimore,
estate sale.
and it's so much fun. But the idea of being a community-centered leader, you did that with Waverly Main Street, which I think is such a nice fusion of your mom's education and your dad's community. But tell me about community-rooted leadership and how you think that's different from other types of leadership.
Yeah, I mean, um I started at a museum. Um, and that was kind of its own community by itself. And what was really funny is that when I was at the museum, they would send me to every community event, community festival, street fair, you name it. They were like, send Diana. And at some point, I was like, why do you all keep sending me to this? I was like, this is like a little bit of an ordeal. I got to like pack a trunk. I have to
Oh, it's
bring
hot,
like,
sweaty work.
it's hot. Like, why me? And they were like, because you're so great with people. They're like,
Mhm,
we get so many good feedback remarks about you in the community. And then finally, my supervisor, who was also a very community person, pulled me aside and said, I don't think this is the place where you're going to grow.
mm,
And she said, I would love to keep you forever. But she said, I feel I would be selfish in keeping you from, I think, what your calling is. And I was like, what? And, I was maybe 23.
mhm,
Maybe, yeah, I think I was like 23. And I was like, seriously? I was like, all right, well, I'll think about it. And next thing I know, I had seen a community organizer position and I was like, I'll try it,
mhm.
and wind up loving it. And I was responsible for doing pretty much whatever community projects I could come up with. And the organization that I was with, my supervisor said, do whatever you want as long as it makes sense. Figure it out. I have
Huh.
an open door policy. And I was like, okay, cool. And whatever wildest idea like I came up with, I would run it by him and he'd be like, whatever. Whatever. This is your thing. And I'd be like, great. And I'd run off and I'd come up with like the craziest things and I'd have to figure out how to execute it. I did some healthy neighborhood work where the neighbors were complaining about rats like destroying their trash cans. And I said, galvanized metal.
Yeah.
Let's get galvanized metal cans for the entire block. I said, and so that you can get your can back, we will paint your address number on the can. I mean, I came up with this whole plan and I said, great. And of course, this is before Amazon, before all these things. And I was like, I'm going to order like 50 metal galvanized trash cans. I
Oh my gosh,
found
those are
a
so
grant.
heavy.
They were so heavy. And I was like, great, I'll just pick them up. And I was like,
In
oh,
my little car, and we'll take 50 trips.
in my little Hyundai. And I was like, oh, I have to figure out a better plan. So I wind up renting like one of those like huge like box trucks from Home Depot. And at that
Which
point, I
does
had,
make you feel really kick-ass. I love
it
driving a
does,
big truck.
right? I had never driven like this big type of vehicle before. And I was like, all right, we're going to learn today. And of course it was like stick shift. And I was like, Okay.
Ooh.
Which I drive stick, but I had never driven like a truck stick. And I said, all right, hopefully everything makes it in one piece. And they loaded like all 50 of these cans in. And then I realized the city has no truck street. So I had to learn
Oh
my
my gosh.
dad's training of how you get from one neighborhood to another really kicked in because I was like, oh, I can't just hop on certain streets. Oh, and there's a clearance. So I had to learn a lot of things very quickly. But that's how I got to really start connecting and really just running around in the community where then, if I got into a bind, um, or like a problem, I'd say, Dad, I don't know what to do.
Mhm.
Like and especially on the public safety side, I'd go, I don't know the law here. Like, what should I do? And my dad would guide me, and he'd say, okay, make friends with the commissioner, make friends with the captain, with the major, so that they know like this is a partnership because what
Mm,
you're doing is going to also help their job. So I
right.
did, and I used to partner with Baltimore City Police when I could. I was McGruff. I wore the McGruff suit for them a couple of
Oh, well, you are
times.
dedicated. So what that's telling me about, community-based leadership is that it really is like looking at the need in the community, figuring
Absolutely.
out a solution, and then taking there is failure is not an option attitude to making it happen while like supporting the whole project with partnerships and the relationships that you
Yeah,
have.
and it's a big part of just sitting and listening. Like,
Mm,
before I got to the fun part of, like, creating the project, I had to listen. I had
right.
to listen to a lot of community people who would say, "Well, they gave us new cans and it didn't work." "Well, why?" "Well, it was, plastic, or it was this, or it was that, or they tried to do this, or they tried to do that." Or, which I've always, tried to educate, and this is where we lift, where we climb, educate like AmeriCorps, Vista workers, and newer folks getting into community organizing, where I would say spend time in these communities before
Mhm,
doing anything, of just listening, understanding who's the person in the community that they all go to. There's always 1 to 5, right? People in a community, on a block, in a neighborhood where that person has lived there 50, 60 years and they know everything. They
mhm.
know where the street was in 1955. They know where the changes were in 1983. They know, the highlight in 97 to where they are in 2026.
Yeah. Well, I
So
feel like
it's listening.
well, and that's so key because sometimes and I think we all I know I get into this loop of like, "Oh, I have such a great idea and I wanna implement," but really taking that step back and making sure that it actually is fitting a solution that fits the problem that people are having, and you don't know unless you're really deeply talking to people. These are complicated issues. When you think about rats in Baltimore, you know, you could theoretically, put poison out. You could do galvanized trash cans. You could look at litter. Like there's so many intersecting problems there
Yeah.
that and people have tried to eradicate that problem for a while on that block. So, untangling those pieces is a really systemic way of kind of looking at that, and it just strikes me that your leadership style really kind of you're not afraid to get into that nitty-gritty and sort out those tangled knots.
Yeah. I mean, and I also have to look at, which I think is where we start looking at big picture, where is the sustainability? Because I
Mm,
never want to work with a community and building something that's they can't keep sustainable.
mhm,
It's great if I can come up with a whole plan and it's exciting and has all the bells and whistles because it's what I want, but how will they keep it sustainable 2 years from now,
right.
5 years from now? I mean, we've seen so many amazing greening projects, which, I'm a gardener. I love to garden. But if there's no plan and someone doesn't
Ugh,
have like the keys to the master plan, that amazing, beautiful green space that you spent so much time and energy and money in building, ends up being a 311 call for,
Yep.
complaints, because now it's just a trash site because there was no plan to keep it sustainable.
Right. Well, and so I wanna we're coming up a little bit on our time, but I don't want to forget about leadership under scrutiny, because when we
Mm.
talk about some of the big projects that you've worked on and, building that sustainability, I think women leaders are under a lot, public officials, yes, but women especially are under a lot of scrutiny. And so how do you, and you've done very visible things, you were executive director of Waverly Main Street. You were the face of museum work in your work with Emerge, even as a candidate and part of the central committee for your District 40, right?
43.
43. So you're in the central committee for 43. How do you deal with the public scrutiny that comes with being a leader? And do you have tips or suggestions about how women especially can contend with this, and especially women of color? It's a lot of
Yeah,
judgment out there.
it's a lot of judgment. I think one is having a really good support system around you. And I say that especially for women of color, because you're going to have tough days. You're going to
Mhm,
have days where, um, I think you evaluate every conversation that you have to go, okay, did I have a tone in my conversation? Did
mm,
I come across a certain way? And I think women think about that more. And I think women of color think about that double that. I think
mhm,
we are constantly thinking about how we are perceived because we are trying to stay away from the angry Black woman stereotype. So
mhm,
I think we end up being a little bit removed because we're internally protecting ourselves. Um, but definitely having a strong support system. I have an amazing small circle that I can call and say, "Hey, what are your thoughts about this? Did I handle this right? What do you think?"
mhm,
Or, my husband, who's an amazing cheerleader, will step in, and and because I work from home, he'll overhear a conversation where he can tell I'm getting maybe a little agitated. And I'll go, "Did I handle that? What did you heard that, right?" Like,
that was
is
real.
is that my perception? Did I like take that wrong? And he'd be like, "No." He like, "You handled that well, because that was irritating me how you were kind of maneuvering that." So it's nice to sometimes, I think, almost have like a witness
Mm,
to some
mhm,
of the craziness that I think Black women will go through. Document everything. Like, I keep documentation of everything, because I think it's important. But I do think there's more scrutiny for Black women leaders. I mean, I think we've seen it here in Baltimore
mhm,
just over, if we're looking at elections, we're looking at Sheila Dixon, we're looking at Catherine
right,
Pugh, we're looking at Stephanie Rollins Blake, where men in those same seats in terms of decisions that they have made would have never been criticized to the level that they were criticized. I mean, even looking at Catherine Pugh and Sheila Dixon in comparison to Dahlia Tarr. So, I mean, there's a lot
yeah,
of scrutiny that specifically happens, I think, with Black women. And I think self care is super important. Like, I now have completely, I have disconnect hours where my phone at some point is on do not disturb,
mhm,
because I am in the moment in my house, in the garden with my husband, wherever. My phone is on do not disturb until I get up the next morning. I
yeah,
make it a point to not reach for my phone anymore the first thing at like 6 a.m. to be like, oh my God, what has happened in the world? No. And I think that's important for women leaders, is to um take that beat, especially for self-care. Delegate Leslie Lopez has this great keychain that says, goodness, don't read the emails. Or don't read the responses. I'll have to ask her because now I
oh,
can't
maybe don't
remember.
read the comments,
Don't
yes,
read the
like,
comments. Thank
yeah,
you. She has a keychain that says don't read the comments, so that you're not getting locked into like just the negativity of crazy things that people say. That has been, I think, my saving grace is not reading comments and feeling free to delete, to block. I've this past year, I think I've been more focused on my peace and what brings
Mhm.
me joy while kind of managing, 90 plus women on the ballot
Mhm. Well, which is a
who
lot,
need
and
something.
so, I mean, in that when you're under that public scrutiny, it sounds like having that bench, this is gosh,
Yeah,
it's like ties in our whole conversation because what I'm getting out of it is that when you have the bench, when you have that support system, it's not all on you.
right,
So, you're in a team. And when you're creating your community, your small circle that's gut checking you and giving you that dose of reality, it's not like you're isolating yourself with yes people. You're rooted in the community to say, okay, this is what's right. This is you're making decisions based on um, not only your close group, but what you've learned from listening. And then you're really securing yourself to know, like, I don't need to be swayed by the comments. Like, if I know what I'm doing is right, I'm good.
right.
And you need to have your own space. I mean, time in the garden is my happy place too. So, like, I get that. And you need spaces just for yourself as well.
Yeah, and I think it's also recognizing, which I think women have a hard time doing this, is recognizing that everyone is not in your corner.
Mm.
Everyone is not your biggest fan.
And it's
Every
okay.
and it's okay. Like, they're not gonna be your cheerleader, and sometimes people just want what you have, and you have to, I think, separate the difference, which I think we kind of function in this space where we're like, we wanna love everybody, we want everybody to like us, we want everybody to be our friends, and recognizing that you have friends, you have colleagues, you have associates, and then you just have people that you're just gonna walk by and maybe just be polite and say, "Good morning."
Mhm.
And recognizing that none of those people have to be on this list of, "Oh my gosh, they have to like me. Oh my
Mm.
goodness, they have to love what I'm doing," or they have to be rooting for me from the rooftops. And I think we have a hard time as women accepting that not everybody likes us, and that's
Mhm.
okay.
Yeah, that can be really hard.
Yeah.
I want to end with what's stirring for you in the future. I know you're always looking 5 years out, but what's kind of bubbling out of your soul right now that you're feeling really called to work on?
Education has been really important to me. And I've been kind of evaluating this more recently as to what's important to me. And being able to open doors and uplift women is incredibly important to me because I want to make sure. And most of the newer alums who have come through the training have heard me say this a ridiculous amount of times that I don't just want to have chairs at the table for people. I want to build the table.
I think that's so
And
important. I love that.
I want to build the table so that you're not asking for a seat at someone else's table. So that's been really on my mind. I've been putting together this other training piece because the gardening piece really sticks with me. And I want to educate people on how to be sustainable on
Mm,
their own terms. So, I'm putting together this Neighbors in Bloom project to really educate people on how to be sustainable. What does that look like for you? Is it, building a garden so that your family can eat? Is it looking at your career differently, right? So that your family can
mm.
continue to eat? What does that look like? So I'm really excited about that project. And then the other project I've been working on is my own podcast, hence I got the mic and the
Oh,
headphones.
yay.
I've been working on a project called The Plug because I want to have conversations about some of the things that are happening across the state and really give people a platform to talk about just some of the great things that people are doing that you don't necessarily hear from all the time.
Oh, I love that. Well, you will have to keep in touch and tell me how
Yes.
each of those projects are going. And Diana, it is always such a delight to talk to you. Thank you for
Same.
coming.
Thanks for
And
having me.
anytime, we'll talk soon.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Executive Alliance podcast. We hope today's conversation inspired you, challenged you, and reminded you that leadership is a journey best traveled together. Executive Alliance is a catalyst for women leaders in Maryland. We believe in advancing women's representation at the highest levels of leadership in business, civic organizations, and government. To learn more about our programs, events, and membership opportunities, visit executivealliance.org. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share it with a colleague, and leave a review. It helps us continue to amplify the voices, experiences, and impact of women leaders. Until next time, remember that every woman has something to teach and something to learn, something to offer and something to receive. When we recognize the value and potential in one another, we become stronger leaders, stronger organizations, and a stronger community. Keep reaching forward, reaching back, and bringing more women into the light.